On the day Charles Dennison was buried, two strangers walked into the funeral, barefoot, sunburnt, and silent. Everyone froze, because they weren't strangers. They were his daughter and her boyfriend. Both vanished without a trace 27 years ago. Their return wasn't a miracle. It was a warning. Subscribe for cinematic true crime stories based on real unsolved disappearances. April 3rd, 2024. Location: Long Hollow Funeral Home, Rosedale, Arizona. The chapel was full by 10:45 a.m. By 10:50, it was quiet enough to hear the air conditioning hum, the kind of silence you don't find outside of grief or guilt. Charles Dennison, once a well-known local rancher and community figure, was dead of cardiac arrest at 72. A plain coffin, polished walnut, rested at the front beneath a stained glass window. White roses lined the aisle. In the second pew, Matthew Dennison sat with his mother. Behind them, a mix of neighbors, old friends, ex-employees, and one uninvited pair who slipped in just as the service began. They were barefoot. The man wore an old canvas jacket, dusty and sun-faded. The woman's dress clung to her frame like a forgotten curtain. Her hair was knotted, sun-bleached. Both looked mid-40s. Wrong? It was the kind of wrong that freezes your lungs, because someone had just whispered their names. That's Grace and Tyler. They disappeared in '97, every head turned. The flowers wilted in the heat, and in the air above Charles Dennison's coffin, the weight of unfinished stories pressed down, heavy as soil. This wasn't closure. It was the start. April 3rd, 2024. Location: Dennison Ranch, Rosedale, Arizona. The funeral ended just before noon. Mourners moved in slow, hushed waves through the chapel doors and out into the sun-scorched gravel driveway, their words muffled by grief, or maybe by something else entirely. Something heavier than grief. Something more complicated. The wind carried a dry, bitter smell, the kind that always came just before a dust storm, and the sky above Rosedale had that sharp Arizona blue that made everything beneath it feel too exposed. Matthew Dennison stood alone on the porch of the family house, watching as the black sedans rolled away one by one. He didn't feel like he'd buried his father. He felt like he'd buried a man-shaped wall, something that had stood between the past and the truth for so long that when it finally fell, there was only dust underneath. He didn't cry. He'd done all his crying back in '97. Inside the house, his mother was sitting in the quiet. She hadn't spoken much since the call from the hospital. Heart failure, they'd said. Fast and final. He'd been alone when he died. That was Charles Dennison's style, always leaving people behind while pretending it was their idea. Matthew looked up as two figures appeared at the edge of the driveway. He didn't recognize them at first. A man and a woman, both barefoot, walking slowly through the gravel like they hadn't felt it dig into their skin. They were dirty, sunburned, dust-covered, wearing clothes that didn't fit or match, like a pair of ghosts who dressed in the dark. The woman's hair was long, knotted, falling down her back in dry waves. The man's face was sharp with hunger and heat. They moved with the same strange coordination, like they'd been walking together for a very long time. At first, Matthew thought maybe they were just drifters. Then the woman looked up, and the bottom dropped out of the world. She had the same gray-green eyes, the same scar at the corner of her mouth, the same crooked brow. He knew that face. He had seen it in his dreams, in police sketches, on yellowed flyers in the sheriff's office. It was Grace, his sister, gone since 1997. Dead, he had believed, like everyone else. Or worse. She stopped 20 feet away, said nothing. Tyler Hart stood beside her, still silent, still unblinking. Matthew recognized him too, older now, sun-worn and hollow. But it was him, Grace's boyfriend, the one she disappeared with, the one they'd all stopped talking about after the car was found burned out by the wash. Matthew couldn't speak. The words had dried up somewhere between the porch and his throat. Sheriff Dana Holt stepped outside, muttering into a phone, but stopped mid-sentence when she saw the pair. "They showed up at the chapel," she said slowly, lowering her voice. "Signed the guest book, then walked straight here." Matthew didn't take his eyes off Grace. "That's not possible." Dana didn't disagree, and yet, he stepped off the porch. The gravel bit into his boots. "Say something," he said to her. Grace looked at him with a gaze that carried 27 years of absence. "You got taller," she said. It wasn't a joke, but it broke something open in him anyway. The voice, the timing, the unshakable familiarity. It was her. It was undeniably her. "Where have you been?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Tyler, who looked to her like a dog awaiting a command. She gave a single nod. Tyler's eyes softened. He didn't speak, but he reached for her hand and held it tightly. Sheriff Holt stepped forward. "Grace." "Tyler, I'm going to need to take you both down to the station. No one's in trouble, but we have a lot of questions. You understand?" Grace nodded. "We'll get you food, water, a doctor if you need one." Grace didn't respond to that. Dana's voice dropped. "You know what day this is?" Grace looked around. At the ranch house, the rusted fencing, the line of trees her father had planted before she was born. "It's Wednesday," she said finally. Matthew felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Dana guided them toward her cruiser. Matthew stood behind, frozen. Grace paused before getting in and turned the one last time. "We never left," she said quietly. And then she was gone again. The sheriff's station looked the same as it had in the 90s, small, windowless, and stale, with old coffee and air conditioning that didn't work when it needed to. Grace was placed in one interview room, Tyler in another. Carla Reyes, the county's newest investigator, watched from behind a pane of one-way glass. She hadn't been in Rosedale long, but she knew a case when it crawled out of its grave and dropped itself on your doorstep. She entered the room with a manila folder in one hand, a voice recorder in the other. Grace was seated at the table, her hands folded, her eyes distant but not vacant. Carla sat across from her. No introductions, no greetings, just the sound of the recorder clicking on. "Grace Dennison, age 45, she said aloud. Reported missing August 19th, 1997, along with Tyler Hart. Last seen entering a white El Camino at a gas station off Route 18. Car was found burned out 2 days later. Blood inside, never tested. Case went cold, presumed dead." Grace didn't react. "You were gone 27 years, Carla continued. "Where were you?" Grace looked up slowly. "We were waiting." "For what?" "For it to be safe." "Safe from who?" Grace's lips pressed into a tight line. "He said we had to stay quiet until it was over." "Who said that?" Her voice was even. "You know who." Carla leaned in. "Your father." Grace didn't answer. Carla placed a photo on the table. "This structure used to exist out past Deming Hill. Do you recognize it?" Grace blinked. "It's gone. It was destroyed in 2001. No record of who built it, no record of who owned it. Satellite imagery shows it was standing the year you vanished." Grace looked at her and said nothing. Carla tried a new angle. "Was Tyler with you the whole time?" "Yes." "Did he hurt you?" "Number he saved me." "From what?" "The ones who followed my father." Carla froze. "Followed him how?" "There were rules. In the place we stayed, about speaking, about leaving, about remembering too much." "Was it a cult?" Grace's hands shook. "We weren't chained," she whispered, "but we weren't free." Carla scribbled a note, then hesitated. "Why come back now?" Grace leaned back in her chair, her face unreadable. "Because the one who watched us is gone," she said. "And now, someone else will come." Carla didn't sleep that night. At the ranch house, Matthew walked into Grace's old bedroom for the first time in decades. Nothing had changed. The bed was still made. The old corkboard still hung by the window. He crossed the room and opened the drawer on the nightstand. Inside was a small tape recorder, the kind she used to carry everywhere. It still had a tape in it. He pressed play. Static. Then her voice. Younger, scared, whispering. "If you find this, Matt, I'm gone. I don't know if I'm coming back. There's something wrong. Something Dad won't say. I heard him talking to someone about the house, about keeping it quiet, about the pact. If I don't come back, don't trust what you hear." The tape cut out. He sat back in the chair, heart pounding. He didn't sleep that night either. April 4th, 2024. Location, Rosedale Sheriff's Office, Interview Wing. The air in the sheriff's station had a quiet pressure to it, like a room waiting to be emptied. Grace sat at the table, unmoving. A paper cup of water sat untouched beside her elbow. Her clothes had been changed. Sweatpants, oversized sweatshirt, both provided by the hospital. But they hadn't removed the desert from her skin. Her hair still carried the brittle edges of sun and time, and her eyes still looked far past the four walls that confined her. Carla Reyes had been watching her from behind the mirrored glass for 20 minutes. Still no outburst, no questions, no requests. Not even the quiet movements of someone trying to pretend they weren't afraid. Grace had the stillness of someone who'd already seen the worst thing that could happen. Carla finally stepped inside and shut the door gently behind her. She didn't sit right away. Just stood across the table, letting her presence fill the room, testing Grace's reaction. There was none. "I'm Detective Reyes," she said evenly. "I'm here to listen, not to push." Grace looked up at her. "I'm not here to interrogate you," Carla continued. "I'm here because I don't understand how two people can vanish in 1997, be presumed dead, and then walk into a funeral 27 years later without a single word about where they've been." Grace's lips parted slightly, then closed. "We're trying to help you," Carla said, "but we don't know what we're helping you out of." Grace's eyes dropped to her hands. They were knotted together tightly, fingertips white from pressure. "We stayed quiet for a reason," she said softly. "Tell me." "If we talked, they'd find us." "Who's they?" Grace didn't answer right away. She looked toward the mirror, almost like she could see through it. Maybe she could. Some people could read a room with frightening precision. "There was a man," she said. "He wasn't part of the family, not at first. He came later, but Dad let him in. Do you remember his name?" "He never gave one. He wore a coat that didn't match the weather. Blue, thick, even in summer." "Was this man responsible for your disappearance?" Grace turned her face away. "He said we had to choose. Obedience or risk." "Risk of what?" She was silent again. Carla let the space breathe. Grace's voice, when it came again, was quieter. "He had rules about what we could say, where we could walk, who we could look at. At night, we weren't allowed to speak. And we were never allowed to mention the outside world, not even to each other." Carla sat down, slowly. "How long were you there?" "I don't know," Grace said. "The day stopped meaning anything. We lived by the sound of the bell." "The bell!" There was a bell tower on the edge of the property. It rang 3 times a day. Morning, meal, silence. After the 3rd bell, we weren't allowed to speak until sunrise. "What would happen if you did?" Grace's fingers tightened. "People disappeared." "Were there others?" Grace nodded. "Kids. Teenagers mostly. A few adults. They didn't all come together. They came in waves. Some stayed for a while, some didn't stay at all." "Were they taken?" "No," Grace said. "They went willingly. At first." Carla scribbled a note in the margin of her file. "How did you end up there?" Grace looked at her with something unreadable in her eyes. "We were told it was a way out. A better life. A place to be clean." "Clean from what?" "From everything. From noise, from danger, from the world." Carla leaned forward. Who told you that? Grace hesitated. My father didn't say it directly, but he knew. He arranged it. He made it sound like an opportunity. To disappear. To be safe. Carla nodded slowly. But you didn't feel safe. Grace's voice was barely audible now. Not after the second summer. Carla flipped open a manila folder and laid down a grainy satellite image. This is the land west of Deming Hill. In 1997, there was a structure out here. By 2001, it was gone. Do you recognize it? Grace looked. Her jaw tensed. That's it. Was it a home? No, she said. It was a holding place, a shelter they called it. But it didn't shelter anything. It buried us. Carla tapped the image. How did you survive? By doing what we were told. For how long? Grace looked up again, and for a moment, she looked her age. Too long, she said. Carla reached into the file and slid out a document. This was found with the original case file. Blood recovered from the driver's headrest of the El Camino you were last seen in. Never tested. It's being tested now. We'll know who it belongs to in 48 hours. Grace didn't blink. It won't be mine. Whose will it be? Grace's face didn't move. Carla asked again, Who did you leave behind in that car? I left the life I thought I had, Grace said, and maybe someone else's. Before Carla could speak again, the door opened. Sheriff Dana Holt stepped inside, looking pale. Sorry to interrupt, she said. You need to come with me. Now. They moved quickly to the medical wing, where Tyler Hart had been under observation since the night before. Nurses buzzed around a secured room, and a trauma counselor stood at the door, arms folded. Inside, Tyler was curled in a fetal position on the bed, rocking slightly. He started speaking about an hour ago, the nurse whispered. Then he panicked, screaming about shadows, light patterns, and the bell. Carla entered slowly. Tyler's eyes snapped open at the creak of the door. They said not to look at the floor, he said immediately. When the sun came in, that's when the noise started. What noise, Tyler? Carla asked. The humming, like something big and buried, like the house itself was breathing. He reached for the edge of the blanket and pulled it over his head. Carla backed out of the room. Later that afternoon, back at the sheriff's office, Carla opened the file again. Grace hadn't lied. There had been a place. It had operated off-grid. No permits, no utility records, no formal land ownership. And it had disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. She returned to her desk and opened a second file, Charles Dennison's estate records. His will had been simple. The ranch went to Matthew. No mention of Grace, no mention of Tyler. Just a quiet legal erasure of the two people who had once defined the house. There was one entry that caught her attention. A bank withdrawal. August 1st, 1997. $30,000 in cash. No explanation, no note. No transaction after that for 2 weeks. Then the El Camino. Then silence. Carla sat back and closed her eyes. Grace and Tyler hadn't run away. They were removed. The question now was, who helped it happen? And why had they finally come back? April 7th, 2024. Location, Dennison Family Home, Rosedale, Arizona. Matthew Dennison hadn't left the house in 3 days. He told people it was because he was handling the estate. The truth was quieter, slower, and harder to explain. Since Grace walked back into his life like a character resurrected from an unfinished book, he couldn't bring himself to walk more than 50 feet from the front door. He moved through the house like it might wake up and remember something. He touched photographs like they might feel warm again. The place was heavier now. The floorboards creaked differently. The air held too many silences, and the walls seemed to listen. Grief had a way of slowing time. But this wasn't grief anymore. This was dread. On Sunday morning, with the sky thick and low like bruised cotton, Matthew walked past the kitchen and down the hallway to the room nobody touched anymore. Grace's door was still slightly ajar, just as it had been the day she disappeared. Their mother, Lorraine, had cleaned it weekly but never opened the drawers. She called it her preservation. Matthew had always called it avoidance. He pushed the door open. Nothing had changed. The bed was made with the same faded comforter from the late 90s. The lace curtain still hung crooked over the narrow window. A copy of Wuthering Heights sat spine-worn on the desk, its pages yellowed and stiff. The room smelled faintly of rose water and dust. He sat on the edge of the bed and let himself breathe. Then he looked toward the desk drawer. He hesitated, then pulled it open. Tucked in the back was something he hadn't seen in almost 30 years. Grace's old portable cassette recorder. Black plastic, worn buttons. The foam on the microphone half rotted away. She used to carry it around everywhere in high school, recording little notes and poems like some private narrator of her own life. He checked the back. Still had a tape inside. When he pressed play, the recorder made a low static hiss. Then her voice emerged. Younger, nervous. "If you're hearing this, Matt, it means I'm gone. And if I'm gone, it's not because I ran. Not really. I overheard something. Dad was on the phone, arguing. He said, 'They know too much. We can't let them talk to anyone until after.'" There was a pause, the sound of her breath shaky in the mic. "I think it has something to do with the dry road. The one out past mile marker 34. I followed him there once. There's a place behind the trees. I saw lights. Heard a bell." Static swallowed the rest. Matthew pulled the recorder from his lap and stared at the wall across from him, where a small photo of the two of them at a birthday party still hung. Grace was smiling. He remembered that smile. It had teeth in it. Not cruel, just sharp, like she could see more than she said. He stood up and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Later that afternoon, he took a crowbar from the shed and returned to the barn. The Dennison family barn had been standing since 1952. 3 generations of livestock and secrets had passed through it. When Matthew was 15, he'd helped his father lay down a new floor. He remembered Charles nailing down the boards one by one, muttering about sealing it right and keeping the cold out. Matthew didn't know why that memory came back to him now, but it did. He walked across the floor slowly, knocking with the end of the crowbar until he heard a hollow sound near the back wall. He knelt and pried up a warped board. Beneath it was a narrow crawl space, maybe 3 feet deep, just enough for a storage box. He pulled it out. Cardboard, duct-taped shut. The word PACT was carved into the lid. Inside, photographs, brittle and curling with age. Mostly children, some standing in lines, some in front of a single-story cement building with no windows. Matthew recognized it instantly from the satellite photo Carla had shown him. There were also letters, typed, not handwritten, addressed only by initials, some signed HL, others unsigned entirely. One read, August 3rd, 1997. She's showing resistance. He thinks the boy can be salvaged, but the girl will talk. Silence her or separate her. We'll reconvene after the 3rd harvest. Matthew felt his stomach turn. Taped to the bottom of the box was a small, cracked Polaroid. Grace, wearing the same shirt she'd had on in that final photograph before her disappearance. But her smile was different here. Tired, tight. A figure stood in the background. Blurry, wearing a long coat, out of place in the desert sun. The man in the blue coat. Matthew stood up too fast and hit his head on a beam. He didn't feel it. His hands were shaking. He took the box and locked it in his truck. That evening, Carla sat in her motel room going over the blood report from the El Camino. The sample had degraded, but the analysis had been conclusive. It wasn't Grace's blood, and it wasn't Tyler's either. It belonged to a teenage girl. Age estimate, 15 to 18. No match in CODIS. A Jane Doe, lost before she was ever missed. She closed the report and opened a second file. Old county missing person reports from the mid-90s. Most had been dismissed as runaways. One caught her attention. Rebecca Lynn Holloway. Disappeared in June of 1995. Last seen at a grocery store off Route 76. Left her bike behind. Her family had moved out of state 6 months later. Case never followed up. Carla stared at the photo. Rebecca had soft eyes and a scar on her chin. She picked up her phone. Sheriff Holt, it's Reyes. I need access to land records out near the Deming Hills site, and any files you have on disappearances between 1993 and 1998. Big net, Dana said. What are you looking for? Patterns. You think Grace was part of something bigger? I think she was the only one who made it back. Carla hung up and looked out the window. Across the desert, lights flickered from the edge of town. Not headlights, not fire. Something slower, like memory trying to surface. Inside a trailer park 2 counties away, a man scrubbed his hands until the water ran pink. He turned off the faucet, dried them on a towel, and walked to a cabinet bolted into the wall. Inside, a row of tapes, all numbered. He selected one and loaded it into an old deck recorder. Grace's voice crackled through. We didn't want to leave, but we had to. The 3rd bell is coming. The man exhaled. Then he picked up a small envelope, sealed and stained, and wrote a single word on the front. Reyes. He set it aside. Then he turned out the light. April 9th, 2024. Location, Highway 16. Storage facility, Rosedale, Arizona. The key didn't match anything on the books. It had arrived in an unmarked envelope on Carla Reyes's motel doorstep at sunrise. No postage, no fingerprints, just a note printed in block letters on yellowing typewriter paper. If you're still looking, try where Charles kept his lies. Locker 117 inches. She turned the brass key in her fingers all morning, thinking it might be a prank. Maybe something from a nosy local who didn't want an outsider digging up buried names. But then she remembered what Matthew had told her the day before. My father kept secrets like they were valuables. Always had some locked box or hidden drawer. If there's a trail, it won't be in the open. So now she stood in front of a corrugated metal unit off Highway 16, just outside Rosedale's city limits. The property looked half abandoned. Dust coated the keypad. Faded signs flapped in the wind. The lock clicked open on the first try. Inside, a cold steel storage unit, the size of a small bedroom, lined with milk crates, plastic tubs, and 2 wooden file cabinets pushed against the back wall. A single fluorescent bulb hung overhead, flickering faintly. It smelled like mildew, rust, and dry paper. She started with the file cabinets. The top drawer of the first one was packed with documents in manila folders, labeled by month and year. She scanned the labels until she found the range. June 1997, September 1997. Her breath caught. She pulled the folder and opened it on the floor. Inside, receipts. Gasoline, grocery store, wire transfers. Nothing unusual at first. Then she found a document labeled Dry Road Supply Invoice, August 1997. The vendor didn't exist anymore, but the list chilled her. 4 military-style cots, 2 50-gallon water drums, 1 box of non-registered medical supplies, 12 MREs, 2 padlocks, industrial-grade 1 shortwave radio. The delivery address had no street, just coordinates and a mile marker. She plugged the coordinates into her phone and stared at the map. It pointed to the scrub lands outside Deming Hill. Exactly where Grace said the quiet house had been. Carla rifled deeper into the box. Beneath the receipts was a stained legal pad, the pages numbered in Charles Dennison's handwriting. There were no titles, just phrases. Page 1. Lynn is a risk. She wants to contact someone, says her uncle will come looking, need to separate her from the others. Page 3. HL insists the boy can be trained. Grace is resisting. If the plan holds, we'll reset after harvest. Page 7. Do not use real names once the bell begins. Recordings to be destroyed, post-transfer. Carla read the final entry 3 times. Burn the house before the frost. Leave nothing, not even the footprints. Her pulse rose as she backed out of the unit and looked around. Empty desert behind her. No one watching. And yet it felt like someone was waiting for her to understand something she wasn't ready for. She locked the unit and called Dana Holt. I found something, she said. He had a private storage locker, receipts for supplies, coordinates matching Grace's story, and journal entries about other people. Kids, mostly. Who are they? Dana asked. Hard to say. He references someone, H.L., and keeps talking about harvests, about destroying evidence. And there's one name that keeps repeating. Whose? Lynn, Carla said. Possibly Rebecca Lynn Holloway. Disappeared in '95. Dana's breath caught. You think Grace and Tyler weren't the first? No, Carla said. I think they were just the first to come back. Back at the Dennison Ranch, Matthew sat on the back steps holding the Polaroid he'd found. Grace in the foreground, face tense. Behind her, the man in the coat, blurred. The image had begun to peel at the edges. He ran his thumb gently along the back, hoping for a clue. Instead, he found something else. Words, faintly indented beneath the surface like they'd been pressed into the paper and never inked. He held the photo under the porch light and tilted it. Harvest shelter, MK3 or non-civilian transfer, clearance sea level or above. What the hell was his father involved in? He walked into the barn again, this time with a flashlight, and searched deeper. Behind the stacked hay bales, past the tool racks and paint cans, he found a small filing box with a lock rusted shut. One good pry with the claw end of a hammer opened it. Inside, more documents, but these were different. Older, yellowed. They weren't just invoices. They were correspondences. Typed, redacted. Letterhead, Department of Interior. Off-grid Programmatic Research Division. His father wasn't just hiding things. He'd been part of something sanctioned. Matthew sat down hard on the workbench stool and flipped through the folders. One memo read, Authorized testing zones in Coconino and Mojave counties will continue until fall 1998. Sites designated for Phase 3 must be cleared of non-participating minors. Any incidental exposure is to be buried via local authority compliance. These measures are not to be shared outside HL's network. At the bottom, a red ink stamp. Topliner Protocol, Restricted Access. Enacted. June 21st, 1997. Matthew stared at the date. That was 2 months before Grace disappeared. He ran outside and called Carla. We have a bigger problem, he said. That evening, Carla drove the rental sedan 22 miles northwest, off-road for the last 3, headlights barely cutting through the rising dust. The coordinates led her to a sunken patch of desert between 2 ridges. A narrow stone path emerged through the brush. She parked and walked. After 100 feet, she found it. Concrete foundation, square, cracked, half buried by time and wind. Nothing remained of the walls, but scorch marks still lined the stone edges. Ash stained the dirt in odd semicircles. She stood still, listening. No birds, no wind. Just the low, impossible hum of her own breath speeding up. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos. As she turned to leave, she noticed something just beyond the far edge of the foundation, a rusted metal hatch, flush with the ground. She pried it open. Inside, a concrete stairwell descending into dark. She turned on her flashlight and climbed down. The stairs ended in a single room. Square, cement walls, scratches etched into the corners. A single metal chair bolted to the floor. On the wall behind it, words were carved in a child's handwriting. Don't listen to the bell. And below it, More faintly, "The third one means you stay." She stepped back up the stairs and didn't stop until she was in the car, door locked, windows closed. Back in her motel room, she downloaded the photos and sent them to an FBI contact in Phoenix. The subject line of the email read, "Possible site, Black Protocol," and, in the body, "They called it a shelter. I think it was a test." She stared at the screen for a long time before she shut the laptop and locked it in the drawer. Grace had said they'd returned because the one who watched them was gone. But Carla was starting to wonder, who was watching now? April 10th, 2024. Location, Mojave County Desert Compound, Arizona border. The road out to the compound wasn't on any current map. Even satellite views had trouble rendering the area. It appeared as a wash of pixelated terrain with no clear shape or boundaries, like the land itself didn't want to be seen. Carla Reyes drove in silence. The black SUV kicked up ribbons of dust that vanished as quickly as they formed, absorbed into the desert's heat. She wasn't alone this time. The Bureau had sent a 3-person forensics team, plus a handler named Agent Dorsey, who made it clear from the moment they stepped out of the helicopter that this case had raised red flags far above a local jurisdiction. They reached the site just after 11 a.m. The structure stood in partial ruin, a burned-out shell of prefabricated cement and wood, sun-bleached and hollow. Half the roof had caved in. Rebar jutted out from collapsed corners. Someone had tried to erase it long ago, but not completely. The frame still whispered its original design. Rows of narrow rooms, one hallway, no windows. Carla stepped into the entryway and immediately smelled it. Not rot, too old for that, but something worse. Chemical ash, sterilized decay, like a fire that had been set to kill memory, not just matter. The team fanned out. Inside one of the side rooms, Dorsey called out, "Over here." Carla moved quickly. The room was mostly intact, small, about 6 feet by 8, with a rusted metal bed bolted to the floor. Chains still hung from the wall. In the corner, a rust-ringed bucket. On the back wall, scratched faintly into the paint. A tally of marks, 43 lines, some crossed out, some still untouched. She wasn't lying, Carla murmured. This place was real. Dorsey crouched by the wall, and it was used. You don't scratch tallies unless you're counting something that matters. Days? Or people? Carla moved toward the back of the compound. Behind the building, the desert stretched wide, the ground flat and cracked. But about 20 yards out, the terrain dipped. A shallow well sunk into the dirt, surrounded by a ring of rocks. Someone had tried to bury it years ago. Poorly. The forensic team moved in with ground-penetrating radar. They found bone fragments in less than 20 minutes. By early afternoon, they had uncovered a full human skeleton buried in a crude fetal position under 18 inches of packed earth. No clothing, no jewelry. Only a faded cloth bracelet around the left wrist, beaded red and white. Carla stared at it. We need dental records and a DNA match. The field anthropologist stepped back. Female, likely Caucasian, teenager, trauma to the ribs and skull. It wasn't a peaceful death. Carla looked toward the ruins. None of them were. By evening, Carla stood at the edge of the crime scene, phone pressed to her ear. Her name might be Rebecca Lynn Holloway, she told Dana. We found a bracelet. Same one in her missing persons photo. We'll confirm it with DNA, but it looks likely. Dana's breath caught on the line. Jesus, that's been a cold case since I was a deputy. Her file was closed too fast, just like Grace's, just like the others. How many others? We don't know yet. The Foundation is giving off signs of layered decomposition. We'll excavate deeper. This could go back years. Dana paused. What do you need from me? Everything you've got on disappearances between 1993 and 2000, especially teens, especially runaways, and anyone who had contact with Charles Dennison. I'll get on it. Thanks, Carla said quietly. This isn't just a cult. It's bigger. Dana hesitated. How big? Carla looked out at the compound. The forensics tent now illuminated by floodlights. The slow movement of figures cataloging decades of pain. Big enough someone made sure no one ever came looking. Back in Rosedale, Grace sat alone in a locked hospital room. She had refused visitors, refused food for almost 2 days, and spoken only to one nurse, to whom she said the same thing every morning and night. Don't let the bell ring. When Carla arrived just before 9 p.m., Grace finally spoke. You went to the place. Carla sat down. Yes. Grace nodded slowly. It's still there then. Some of it. Grace looked up, her eyes dry. Did you find her? We think so. Rebecca Holloway. Yes. She was your friend? Grace didn't answer at first. Then, she was the first to tell me something was wrong. I thought she was just afraid. But she knew. She always knew. And when she tried to leave, Carla leaned in. What happened? She disappeared, Grace said. Just before the 3rd bell. Carla hesitated. You keep talking about that. The bells. What did they mean? Grace's mouth barely moved. The 1st bell meant you were awake. The 2nd meant you obeyed. The 3rd meant you belonged. And if you didn't belong, you didn't get a 4th. She looked at Carla. I still hear them sometimes, but not from outside. From inside me, like something was planted and never pulled out. Carla sat in silence for a long moment. Then she said, We found another file. From your father's storage. It had memos. Governmental ones. Black protocols. Redacted names. Does HL mean anything to you? Grace's expression didn't change, but her breath hitched. I never knew his name, just his voice. Calm, careful, always wearing gloves, even in the heat. Was he the man in the coat? Grace nodded slowly. He wasn't from the desert, she said. He brought the desert with him. Back at the compound, just after midnight, the excavation team uncovered a 2nd burial pit. Inside, the bones of 2 children. The anthropologist radioed Carla. We're going to need body bags. And press silence. Whatever this was, it wasn't a one-time event. Carla stood at the motel window and watched lightning dance across the far ridges of the desert. She had dealt with serial predators, backroom corruption, even missing child units. But this felt different. This felt like someone had rewritten the rules and dared the world not to read them. April 11th, 2024. Location: Rosedale Public Records Office, downtown Rosedale, Arizona. The building smelled like paper that had outlived its readers. Carla Reyes stood inside the cramped records office on Main Street, her fingers moving slowly across a wall of filing cabinets older than her badge. Yellow stickers peeled from rusted handles. Somewhere in the back, a portable fan buzzed against a window that hadn't opened since the Reagan administration. The clerk, a slow-moving man with thick glasses and a voice like gravel, had only shrugged when she showed him the request form. You want files from the mid-90s? He'd asked. You're digging deeper than most ever bother. That's the point, she'd replied. Now, an hour later, she had 3 boxes stacked in front of her, each labeled in black marker. Missing persons. 1993 to 2000. She sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the first one. Inside, dozens of brown folders, loosely arranged, some handwritten, some typed. A few had photographs paper-clipped to them, most faded, some missing entirely. There were names she didn't recognize, ages, descriptions. In most cases, brief and indifferent notations in the margins, likely runaway. No foul play suspected, closed after 90 days. Some files were just a single sheet. 1 paragraph. No interviews, no follow-ups. Names recorded and released into silence. But patterns began to emerge. 15 cases in 7 years. All teenagers. All within 80 miles of Rosedale. All disappeared between May and September. None solved, none reopened. She flipped open a folder marked Denise C/1994 and paused. Scrawled in blue pen across the top, "Connection to Dry Road rumor?" And beneath that, circled twice, one phrase, "Last seen speaking to Charles Dennison." She pulled 2 more files. Same note, different years. In each, some form of reference to the Dennison family, Grace, Charles, or even Tyler. Not formal interviews, but community notes. Hearsay logged and then buried. Carla set the files aside and took a breath. This wasn't negligence. This was erasure. Back in Phoenix, there would be a board, red string, photographs, a growing web. But in Rosedale, it was a pile of dust-covered folders, tucked into a building no one visited unless they had nowhere else to go. She stood, stacked the files, and walked to the counter. "I need to take these," she told the clerk. "Need a release form for that." She slid one across the desk. He glanced at it, then hesitated. "These girls, you think it's all connected?" "I think someone made sure no one ever asked." Back at the sheriff's department, Dana Holt pored over the documents with a frown deep enough to leave lines. She'd been in Rosedale for over 2 decades. She knew its rhythm, its ghosts. She knew that sometimes a missing kid really was just a runaway. But 15, all tied, however loosely, to one man. "I knew Charles was hard," she said quietly. "Strict. But this, he wasn't working alone," Carla replied. "No," Dana said, "but he knew who was." Carla pulled out a photograph recovered from the compound the day before. It was black and white, curled from age. A group of children stood in 2 lines in front of a nondescript building, all wearing identical gray shirts. At the far right stood a man in a dark coat, his face just out of frame. Only his hands showed, gloved. Carla tapped the lower corner. "You recognize this?" Dana squinted. "That looks like the old wildlife station outside Dry Road. It was shut down in '92. Budget cuts. But that building's still standing. It's not listed in any government database. Rural facilities get forgotten." "Not by accident," Carla said. She flipped open another folder. "There's a name that shows up in the records. Not full, but initials. HL. Always connected to funding requests, off-book permits, experimental classifications, and Charles's own journals mention it." Dana frowned. "HL. That sound familiar to you?" Carla nodded. "Hollis Lane." Dana blinked. "Jesus, I haven't heard that name since before the turn of the century." "Who is he?" "Used to be with the state, Wildlife Bureau. But he did more than that. He was always sniffing around disaster zones, closed schools, abandoned mines. Said he was surveying for environmental risk. People said he was looking for test sites. He vanished in '99. Feds came around asking questions, then nothing." Carla sat back. "That matches the timeline." Dana nodded slowly. "He was the kind of man who never took off his gloves?" Carla felt a shiver at that. Later that morning, Carla sat alone in her car, parked outside the hospital. She hadn't moved in nearly 20 minutes. She'd written 6 pages of notes and had deleted 5. There were too many phrases that didn't belong to any known system. Clearing the line. Listening trials. Phase 2 conditioning. These weren't cult ramblings. They were clinical, structured, systematic. This wasn't spiritual manipulation. It was research. She pulled out her phone and called Matthew. "Did your father ever work with psychologists or academic programs? Anything tied to behavior modification?" Matthew was quiet. Then, he always read medical journals, subscribed to obscure newsletters, stuff about cognitive isolation and remote therapy. "I thought it was because of Mom. After she had her breakdown." "Your mother had a breakdown?" "She locked herself in the cellar for 2 days once. Said she was trying to stop the echo. He told me not to tell anyone." Carla wrote that down. Do you think she knew? I think she saw enough to make her want to forget. Carla hung up and stared at the dashboard for a long moment. Something was wrong with Rosedale. Not just the ranch, not just the compound, the town itself. The silence wasn't passive. It had been practiced, learned. That night, Carla returned to the Denison Ranch with a portable scanner and UV light. She told herself it was just to cross-reference locations from Charles's journals, maybe search for more physical evidence. But, in truth, she was hoping the house would confess. She moved slowly from room to room, scanning walls, floors, ceilings. In the master bedroom closet, she found it. Behind a false panel, a safe. It opened with a 4-digit code. She tried the year Grace was born, then the year she disappeared, then the year Charles bought the second El Camino. The last one worked. Inside were 2 items: a reel-to-reel audio tape and a worn envelope marked Session 14, Grace D. She slid the tape into her portable player. The hiss of static. Then Charles's voice, clinical and calm. Subject exhibits resistance to verbal null commands. Phase 1 stimuli insufficient. Initiating layered exposure at 4-second intervals. Tone loop engaged. Then her voice. Younger, weaker. It's too loud. Please stop. Repeat your phrase, Grace. I belong to the sound. I belong to the still good. Carla hit stop. Her hands were trembling. This wasn't a parent trying to save a troubled daughter. This was a handler programming a subject. She opened the envelope. Inside, a single photograph of Grace, seated in a narrow room, wires on her temples. Eyes blank, mouth open. The back of the photo was stamped with a red seal. Topliner facility, do not duplicate. Clearance C or higher. The date, August 15th, 1997. 2 days before she vanished. Elsewhere, in a motel on the edge of a town called Ash Ridge, the man watching old tapes packed up his belongings. He placed a burner phone in a box with coordinates scribbled on a sticky note. Then he paused, looking at a photograph pinned above the dresser mirror. It showed a girl standing in the middle of a desert, staring at the camera, sunlight behind her. Beneath it, he'd written 3 words: "Do not forget." He shut off the lights and left. April 13th, 2024. Location: Secure Trauma Unit, Rosedale Regional Medical Center. There was a kind of silence that didn't come from peace. It came from erasure. Grace Denison sat in a narrow hospital bed, back against the wall, staring at the muted television mounted in the corner. It wasn't on. It never was. She liked it better that way. Just a black screen, a dark glass reflection of a world she barely recognized anymore. Every night since she returned, she'd written the same 4 words in the corner of her hospital-issued notepad. What stayed, stayed silent. And then she'd cross them out. Carla Reyes arrived just after 6 p.m. She brought coffee, a notebook, and the tape recorder Grace hadn't yet asked to see. The doctors had been cautious. Avoid triggering language, they warned. She's not psychotic. She's recovering in layers. Carla knew that already. She could see it in Grace's posture, rigid, alert, like someone trained to freeze at the sound of a door hinge. She took the seat beside the bed and placed the recorder on the tray table between them. I found something, she said quietly. Grace didn't look at her. I think you know what it is. Still, no answer. I listened to the audio from your session, the one marked Session 14. I know what they did. Grace closed her eyes. No, she said. You know what they recorded. Carla sat with that for a moment. Then she leaned forward. Help me understand. Grace opened her eyes. There was a man they called the architect. We didn't see him often, only when someone wasn't responding. He didn't shout, didn't hurt us, just spoke, like a librarian in a war zone. Was that HL? I don't know. I think so. The others called him the voice behind the gate. I called him the unlearning man. Why? Because after you spoke to him, you forgot what your name meant. Carla wrote that down. They erased identities. Number, they dulled them, like sanding a mirror. Grace shifted in the bed. They weren't trying to build something. They were trying to hollow something out. Fill it with silence, not peace, not purpose, just absence. A kind of quiet they could control. Carla leaned in. Did they ever succeed? Grace looked up sharply. They almost did. The words chilled Carla more than she expected. Why come back now? Grace hesitated. Because the Watchers are dead, but their replacements aren't. We were never the end. We were the trial run. Carla opened her notebook. I think I found your replacement. Grace didn't speak. We found skeletal remains behind the compound. One was a girl, 15 or 16. The other two were children, likely under 12. The anthropologist said they were buried hastily, as if someone had left in a hurry. I remember her, Grace whispered. The girl. Her name was Nova. That wasn't her real name, but it's what she called herself. Why? Because she said she wasn't born. She was detonated. Grace's voice cracked slightly. She heard the bell once and never spoke again. Not a word. I think they tested something on her. Something different. Carla felt her pulse quicken. What kind of something? I don't know. But after it, her eyes didn't blink at the same time. There was a long silence. Grace looked at the wall. They filmed us. Did you know that? Yes, we found footage. Then you know it wasn't about doctrine or beliefs. It was about control. Carla nodded. Grace continued. There was one day. I still dream about it. It was supposed to be a harvest, but something went wrong. The gate stayed closed. The bells didn't ring. I think someone inside tried to stop it. Who? Tyler. Carla tensed. He doesn't remember it. He wouldn't. They erased more of him than anyone. But he tried. I know he did. That's why we got out. Carla paused. Did he help you escape? Grace nodded slowly. But it cost him his face, she said. Not literally, just the part of it that could remember why he was human. Carla closed the notebook. Grace, is there a list of others who might still be alive? There was. But it wasn't written down. It was recited. At night, like a prayer. Can you remember it? Grace shook her head. Only the first line. She closed her eyes again. The harvest is not death. It is the whisper before forgetting. Carla left the hospital in silence. That night, she called an old contact at the Justice Department and requested an internal cross-agency scan of any classified research programs under the name Topliner or connected to any personnel under the name Hollis Lane. The line was quiet for a while. Then, that'll raise flags. I'm counting on it, she said. Meanwhile, at the outskirts of town, inside a shuttered veterinary clinic that hadn't seen a patient since 2005, a man sat on the floor with photographs spread across the tile. He arranged them carefully, faces of children, eyes blurred out, names printed beneath in faded ink. He picked up one photo, Grace, age 17, and stared at it for a long time. Then he added it to a pile marked Remaining Variables. He picked up another photo, Carla, marked it with a single black slash, then turned off the light. April 14th, 2024. Location, Phoenix, Arizona. Federal Records Annex. The building didn't look like much, just glass and steel, surrounded by a cracked parking lot and a fence that needed replacing 5 years ago. But deep inside the Federal Records Annex, beyond the public archives and old census rolls, lay something harder to access, the unindexed. Carla wore her credentials like armor. DOJ clearance had opened the door, but not without pushback. The man guiding her, Agent Kenneth Miles, was quiet, Cautious, the kind of career lifer who knew where all the locked doors were and never asked what was behind them. They descended 2 floors into a temperature-controlled wing marked Classified Programs. Review request required. Your name's on a few watch lists now, Miles said dryly as they stopped outside a sealed room. Topliner isn't something that gets flagged often, but when it does, someone always starts listening. I want them listening, Carla said. Someone let it happen. Someone tried to erase it. Erasure was part of the program. He slid his access card and entered a narrow reading room lined with digital archive terminals. A single file had been preloaded onto one of them. Project Topliner. Site record. RZ34, Arizona. Year range, 1994 to 2000. Clearance required, C+. Condition, decommissioned, undisclosed. Carla sat and opened the file. It wasn't a typical report. There were no mission statements, no summaries, just a long string of scanned documents, field reports, and redacted memos. She began scrolling. Subject field notes. June 1995. Third auditory trial complete. Subjects displaying rapid linguistic withdrawal and increased visual tracking errors. One girl stopped responding to her given name, reassigned as Astra 6. Internal memo. August 1997. Recommendations for early harvest rejected. Control group still viable. Site RZ34 maintains behavioral suppression without secondary conditioning. Adjustments made to sleep deprivation patterns. See Chart 4, Facility Closure Order. September 2000. Due to internal whistleblower activity, Topliner Phase 3 will terminate all field locations. Site RZ34 to be purged and scrubbed. Any surviving assets deemed unviable for reintegration. Recommend psychological neutralization of involved personnel. Carla sat back. Psychological neutralization. Not discharge, not therapy, not support. Erasure. They didn't just abandon the kids. They broke the ones who helped them. She pulled up a personnel log. Most names were redacted. One wasn't. Lane, Hollis designation, Senior Behavioral Engineer. Assigned sites, RZ12, RZ34. Status, deceased, unconfirmed. She clicked on the only image attached. It was grainy but clear enough. A man in a long coat. Gloves, dark eyes. The same silhouette from the photograph behind Grace at the compound. Carla exhaled slowly. So he was real. Miles returned with a folder in hand. You need to see this too. We found it misfiled under wildlife assessments. He opened the folder. Inside was a printed list, dated 1998, titled Retained Variables, Post-Trial Observation Targets. Carla read the names. She knew some of them. Grace Dennison, Tyler Hart, Rebecca Holloway, Nova J, last name withheld. Matthew Dennison. Her breath caught. Matthew's name had an asterisk. Genetic proximity, non-test subject, high observational value. Why is he on here? She asked quietly. They monitored not just participants, but anyone connected to them genetically, Miles said. Siblings, parents, sometimes even neighbors. It was part of their long-term efficacy study. Carla closed the folder. They were playing God, she said. No, Miles replied. They were playing gardener, deciding who to prune, who to grow, and who to silence. That evening, Carla returned to Rosedale and met Matthew in the barn. She didn't hand him the file. Not yet. Instead, she told him what he needed to hear slowly, like lowering someone into cold water. You were on a list, she said, not because you were in the program, because you were related to someone who was. They watched you. For how long? Years. Matthew looked toward the barn rafters. He always said there were things I wasn't ready to understand. I thought it was just his way of being cruel. It wasn't cruelty, Carla said. It was curation. He was grooming you to stay obedient, silent. Matthew picked up the old recorder from the barn shelf and held it tightly. "What happens when the silence breaks?" he asked. Carla looked at him. "We find out what was hidden inside it." That night, Carla dreamt of Grace. Not as she was now, but younger. 17. Standing in the doorway of a cement room, a small tape recorder in her hand, whispering something over and over again. But the words wouldn't come through. Only the bell. 3 chimes, then blackness. She woke gasping. She opened her phone to check the time. A new message was waiting. No sender, just a string of coordinates and a single phrase. This is where it started. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. The coordinates led to a place not on any map, but the elevation tag read clearly, RZ01. The original site. Far away, under a blanket of desert stars, a bunker door opened for the first time in 25 years. Inside, light flickered to life. Old speakers crackled, and then, faintly, over a silent intercom, "Begin reacquisition protocol. April 15th, 2024. Location, Redstone Mesa, Arizona. Site RZ01. The desert was colder than it should have been. Carla drove the SUV with both hands tight on the wheel. The road had disappeared 5 miles ago. Now it was just earth and instinct. Grace sat in the passenger seat, silent. Matthew was in the back, a backpack resting beside him. Water, flashlights, one of Charles's old journals, and a revolver he said he didn't know how to use. None of them spoke for the first hour. They didn't need to. The coordinates had led them here. A raised plateau on Redstone Mesa, surrounded by dead brush and rust-colored cliffs. The place didn't feel abandoned. It felt dormant. Matthew was the first to see the hatch. "There," he said, pointing. Half buried in the rise. It was made of thick steel, bolted with a central locking mechanism now rusted through. Carla wedged it open with a crowbar and let the weight of the air do the rest. The door creaked like a tomb sighing in its sleep. A narrow staircase descended into shadow. They switched on flashlights. Carla turned to the others. "Once we're in, we stick together. No separating, no touching anything we can't identify. Understood?" They nodded. One by one, they stepped inside. The walls were metal-paneled and damp with condensation, but not moldy. Whatever this place had been built for, it had been sealed well. After 30 feet, the stairwell opened into a small foyer with doors on each side. A panel labeled RZ01:control glowed faintly above them. This wasn't just a compound, Carla murmured. It was a facility. They opened the first door. Inside, a control room. Banks of dead monitors. A wall of reel-to-reel players. Shelves filled with notebooks, tapes, labeled vials. A large whiteboard stood in the corner with diagrams too faded to read. But in the center of it all, scrawled in thick black marker, "The ear doesn't forget, even if the mind does." Grace moved toward the central desk. Her hand hovered over a stack of tapes. "This is where they played it," she said. "Played what?" Matthew asked. "The loop," she whispered. "The bell, the tone, the phrases. They sent it through the vents. They thought if they repeated it enough, we'd stop resisting." "Did it work?" Carla asked. Grace's eyes met hers. "For some." Carla moved to a drawer labeled Subject Compliance, Archive A. Inside were records, subject numbers, observation notes, diagrams of brainwave responses. Grace's number was there, GD.9 next to it, a list of scheduled listening trials. Final entry, GD.9, non-compliant. Transfer denied. Archive for potential reprogramming. Handler, H.L. Carla, pulled out her phone and took photos. Then she found a sealed envelope taped beneath the drawer. She opened it. Inside was a Polaroid, grainy but unmistakable. A row of teenagers, all seated in a circle, headphones on, blindfolded. In the center stood the man in the coat, Hollis Lane, still alive. No doubt now. And in the far right corner of the photo, someone else, not a teenager. Watching from behind the glass, clipboard in hand, Charles Dennison. Carla exhaled sharply. He wasn't just a contact, he was part of it. Matthew didn't move. Grace closed her eyes. "He told me they were helping us," she said. "Helping us unlearn the parts of ourselves that made life hard. That love could be conditional, but peace was programmable." Carla looked at her. "Did you ever believe him?" "No," Grace said. "But I pretended to. That's what saved me." They opened the next room. A dormitory, 8 beds, all bolted down. Metal lockers, faded chalk markings on the walls, phrases scrawled over and over. "I am still. The world is noise. Belonging is obedience." Grace stared at one of the phrases, lips trembling. "I wrote that," she whispered. "With chalk they gave me for good behavior." Matthew ran his fingers across one of the lockers. "This is real," he said quietly. "All of it. Everything they said was gone." "It's not gone," Carla said. "It's buried." In the final room, they found it. A recording chamber. Soundproofed walls. A single chair in the center. Headphones bolted in place, straps on the arms and ankles. A small black intercom box labeled Tone, Primary. Resonance trial sat on a shelf nearby. Matthew walked around the chair, visibly shaken. "How many people sat in this?" he asked. Carla didn't answer. Grace did. "Too many." She stepped into the center of the room and closed her eyes. "They played the tone for 8 hours straight. You could only leave once you said it. I belong to the still." "If you didn't say it, they started the cycle again." "What happened when you finally said it?" Carla asked. "You didn't dream anymore." She looked at Carla. That's what they were really testing. The dreamless mind. How far they could push silence before it became identity. Carla's flashlight flickered. Matthew's hand went to the revolver on instinct. A sound echoed through the corridor. Not a footstep. A tone, faint, dull, like a distant bell. Carla spun. "That wasn't from us." Matthew stepped back into the hallway, eyes wide. "It's coming from the control room." They ran, back into the central hub. The monitors were still dead, the machines dark, but the speakers had come to life. "This is a final directive. If you are hearing this message, the system has been breached, variables compromised, containment protocol invalid. Silence the remaining vectors." The voice was unmistakable. "Hollis Lane! Not recorded, live!" Carla slammed the machine off. "They're watching," she said. "They've been watching this whole time." Matthew stepped back. "We have to go, now!" Grace didn't move. She looked toward the wall of tapes, toward the last entry in the journal she'd never read. She reached for a tape labeled Final Trial, GD9, and pocketed it. "Then let them watch," she whispered. "This time, we're watching back." They emerged from the hatch just after dusk. The wind had shifted. The air smelled like ozone and smoke. Somewhere far off, the low growl of an engine echoed through the desert. Carla turned, scanning the ridgeline. Headlights. 1 vehicle, then 2, then 3. April 15th, 2024. Later that night. Location: Redstone Mesa, Perimeter Ridge. 3 vehicles, 2 black SUVs and a tan utility truck. They approached slowly, tires hissing over gravel, headlights off until the last few hundred yards. The desert swallowed the sound, but not the presence. You could feel them coming, like pressure under your skin. Carla crouched behind a rise in the rocks, watching through binoculars. Matthew and Grace knelt beside her. No one spoke. The SUV stopped 30 yards from the open hatch. Doors opened. Men stepped out. No uniforms, no insignia. All wore tactical jackets, radios on their shoulders, and identical expressions, detached, like they were there to clean something up, not discover it. Grace whispered, They're retrievals, not enforcement. Carla nodded grimly. They're not here to talk. A fourth figure emerged from the passenger seat of the truck. Not tactical gear, civilian coat, gray hair, gloves. He didn't speak, just walked slowly to the open hatch and stared into it like it was an old grave he'd helped dig. Matthew stiffened. Is that? It's him, Grace said. Lane. They watched as the team moved inside the bunker in silence, flashlights sweeping in practiced arcs. Grace didn't flinch until Lane followed them in. Carla turned to her. How did he survive? All records say he was declared dead in 2000. Grace's voice was low. He told us once, silence is the safest mask. I think he made himself disappear the same way he made us disappear. What do we do? Matthew asked. Carla scanned the horizon. We wait. They hunkered down behind the rocks. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The team re-emerged, walking faster this time. 2 carried crates, recordings, files. 1 had the reel-to-reel machine from the audio chamber. And then Lane came out. He was carrying something too. Carla's stomach dropped. It was Grace's file, the one she'd found at RZ-01. He handed it to one of the men, then gave a curt nod. They began pouring fuel into the hatch. They're going to destroy it, Carla said. Grace's breath caught. That place is the only proof. We've got backups, Carla replied. Photos, scans, but not presence, Grace whispered. Not the truth of being inside. Carla made a decision. I'm going down there. Matthew grabbed her arm. You're outnumbered, outgunned. They're not expecting resistance. They think everyone's still too scared. I can stall. Get close. No, Grace said suddenly. They both looked at her. If anyone goes down there, it's me. Carla's face went hard. You're a survivor. You don't owe them another second. I'm not doing it for them, Grace replied. I'm doing it for me. She stood and stepped out from behind the rocks. Before Carla or Matthew could stop her, she was walking into the open. Head up, hands visible. Every step was steady, measured. The wind caught her hair, blew dust across the dry earth. One of the retrieval men shouted, then raised his weapon. Lane raised his hand to stop him. He stepped forward. The others held back. Grace walked until they were only a few feet apart. She stared at him. He studied her like an old sculpture pulled from a cave. I thought you were erased, he said quietly. Grace didn't flinch. You tried. You left before you were ready, before we completed the cycle. No, she said. I left the moment I realized silence wasn't peace. Lane's expression didn't change. You should have stayed gone. I did, she said. But you didn't. He took a step closer. This isn't a conversation. Then what is it? Lane raised the file in his hand. This is a recollection. A final sweep of unresolved vectors. The data from Site 34, from RZ-01, from everything your father failed to cleanse. She stiffened. He didn't fail. He changed. No, Lane said. He hesitated. There's a difference. Behind them, the other men began igniting the fuel. The hatch flared with orange light. Inside, decades of silence prepared to vanish in smoke. Grace looked him in the eye. Do you want to know what I remember most? She asked. Lane paused. She leaned closer. I remember the bell, she said, and I remember choosing not to obey it. That choice is still mine. She reached into her coat and pulled out the tape. Final trial, GD9. Do you know what's on this? She asked. He didn't answer. It's not just me breaking, it's you, giving the command that failed. Your voice, your failure. Lane's hand moved toward her. Carla's voice rang out from the ridge. Stop! All heads turned. She was holding her badge in one hand and her phone in the other. Every second of this encounter is being live-streamed to a secure federal server. If you shoot, if you touch her, this becomes a national incident. Lane's eyes narrowed. You think that matters? Carla smiled grimly. I think you've spent 25 years hiding. You wouldn't be here yourself unless exposure was a threat. He stared at her. Then slowly, he turned to his team and gave a subtle hand signal. One by one, they backed away from the hatch. Lane looked back at Grace. You think this is over? No, she said, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. Then she tossed the tape into the burning hatch. He flinched, not because of the evidence, but because it meant she didn't need it. She had survived without it, and that made her untouchable. He turned and walked back to the truck. The vehicles disappeared into the darkness minutes later. Carla, Grace, and Matthew stood at the ridge and watched the last breath of Site RZ-01 curl into the sky. Ash and data, indistinguishable in the wind. April 17th, 2024. Location: Rosedale, Arizona. Town Hall, various. The town never had a press conference, no police statements, no Justice Department press release, no breaking news headline on the national evening circuit. Just a quiet shift, a stillness that felt earned. But the story didn't stay buried. 3 days after the confrontation at Redstone Mesa, a leaked digital file began to circulate on a private journalist network. Audio from a reel-to-reel labeled Session 14, GD.9. The voices were unmistakable. A teenage girl, crying, afraid. A man's voice, calm, rehearsed. Repeat your phrase, Grace. I belong to the sound. I belong to the still again. I belong to the sound. The media didn't know what to do with it at first. It sounded like fiction, until the photographs surfaced. The white rooms, the headphones, the scratches on the wall. And then, the file folder bearing a real government seal. Topliner, RZ-34, Behavioral Modification Trials, Non-Civilian Application. That was the match strike. By April 19th, Topliner was trending globally. People asked how it had stayed secret. The harder question was why no one had wanted to hear it. Carla sat in her motel room with the window open, listening to the cicadas. Her phone was off. Her laptop closed. On the nightstand, 3 printed photographs. One of the bunker entrance, now buried in concrete. One of Grace, age 17, eyes half lost in the past. And one of a document labeled Retained Variables, Observational Status, Active. There were no names on that last one, just initials. The final one, CR. Her own. She looked out into the night. She had become part of the story. She understood now why it was so hard to walk away. Because when the system watches you for long enough, you start watching it back. And what you see can never be unseen. Grace didn't go back to the hospital. She bought a small cabin in Sedona, surrounded by pine. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night, hand against her chest, waiting for a bell that no longer rang. But the silence didn't frighten her anymore. She'd reclaimed it. She filled it with sounds she chose. Music, wind, laughter when it came. And every morning she wrote one line in a new journal. I remembered, and I stayed. Matthew sold the ranch. He kept one item, the old recorder from the barn. He didn't listen to it. He didn't need to. He spent his days restoring broken radios and discarded cassette players. Sometimes he'd find forgotten tapes inside them, lost voices, static poetry. And he'd wonder how many of those voices once belonged to someone like Grace, like him, like anyone who almost vanished. Dana Holt submitted her retirement paperwork the same week. She told no one where she was going, but she left a box on Carla's car seat before disappearing. Inside, a map with 7 hand-drawn X's, a flash drive with over 200 digital files from the Rosedale Records office, and a sticky note that said simply, "We missed more than we caught. Don't stop." And somewhere far from Arizona, in a coastal city that didn't care about the desert, a man checked into a hotel under a different name. He opened a briefcase and removed a copy of a black notebook. The original was gone now, burned or buried, but he had copied it carefully, word for word. He began reading from the beginning. The ear does not forget, even if the mind does. And he smiled. Because systems don't die. They hibernate. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear them waking. May 2nd, 2024. Location, unknown. Transcript extract, uploaded anonymously. Transcript begins. File ID, 43B/designation, outlier case feed. Access level, restricted. Clearance override, logged, unknown user, static. Then a voice, female, steady, familiar. Grace. Voiceover. You asked me once what it felt like, being erased. I told you it felt like silence. But that wasn't true. It felt like being rewritten in pencil, just dark enough to pass, just light enough to vanish if someone rubbed hard enough. You learn to stay still. You learn that stillness is survival. You learn to repeat what they say until what you say sounds strange in your own mouth. They thought they made us forget, but forgetting isn't silence. Forgetting is waiting. And I waited. I waited until the watchers went blind, until the machines rusted, until the tone cracked in their own ears. And when I came back, I didn't come back to remember. I came back to make them forget me, because even ghosts leave fingerprints, especially the ones built by men who believe the past could be buried under protocol and passwords. You can bury names, but not echoes, not forever. Pause. This is my voice, this is my bell, and I'm ringing it for the rest of them now. Transcript ends.